Spider-Man No Way Home is now 3.5 years old, and we've only now finally learned the title for the sequel, which will abandon the home theme in favor of a brand new start, or rather, a brand new day. Spider-Man Brand New Day releases in around 16 months from this video, but we don't know who will be appearing, and more specifically, what interests me, who will be the villain. Well, in this video, I'll be going over all the potential candidates and determining both who I'd like to see the most, and what my prediction is. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and become a member for early access to videos. Let's begin. Before we determine who is the villain, we have to determine who isn't by eliminating everyone we can. For that, we don't actually need to know what the movie will be about. It may be completely grounded, have a grounded tone but high stakes, or involve the multiverse. But two things are certain: the villains of the previous MCU Spider-Man movies won't be used, at least not as main villains. This eliminates the Vulture, Mysterio, Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, the Lizard, Sandman, and Electro, as well as the other more minor villains who don't really have main villain potential anyway, like Shocker, Tinkerer, Hydra Man, Molten Man, and Cyclone. And then are the Sony movies. Now, I think initially Sony planned to use the multiverse to bring all these projects together, have Tom Holland's Spidey face off against Tom Hardy's Venom and maybe the others, but that ship has sailed. The Sony movies have crashed and burned, and I don't think even they think it'd be a good idea to corrupt their billion-dollar franchise with those failures. Going a step further, I think the Sony movies have also made it so that those particular villains, as much as their movies failed, will not be considered to be used in Spider-Man 4. I think Venom is an exception to this, except Venom also needs another movie, like to be set up with the black suit, and then Carnage would have needed multiple movies. Noel isn't really a Spider-Man villain. Everyone else could be entirely eliminated. Morbius is pretty lame anyway, Ezekiel Sims isn't really a villain, and then both the Rhino and Lucian Crown don't have main villain potential. The true victim of this, and it's really just one of them, is Kraven the Hunter, which is truly one of Spider-Man's best villains, the single best in my opinion, who has not been used yet as a main villain in a live-action movie, and the perfect choice for the darker tone Spider-Man seems to be finding himself after the events of No Way Home. Sony Kraven is, I think, poorly cast. He's not villainous from an alternate universe and appeared in a bad, huge bomb of a movie. That was never an option, but now I think a fresh, newly cast, villainous MCU version of Kraven isn't really an option either because of that movie. Frankly though, while Kraven was my top choice for a while, after being given such a large role in Marvel's Spider-Man 2 and being done so well there, I'm not sure how the movie version could improve on that, which is why I'd rather see someone else, at least for now. Maybe in the sequel to this movie, Kraven could be the villain. All those eliminated, we now have to go off of what we know. One thing is that Brand New Day will release between Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars, and has a lot of rumors surrounding it. It might take place before Doomsday and have an ending that connects to it, like Ant-Man and the Wasp with Infinity War. In this case, it'll be completely grounded. It might take place during Doomsday and involve that movie's plot, suggesting another light foray into the multiverse. It might also take place after Doomsday and therefore likely on Battleworld, in which case it'll likely be fully and entirely multiversal. Then again, maybe it'll just be New York City in Battleworld and therefore be multiversal and grounded at the same time. Because we don't know which route it's taking, we have to assume all options as possibilities and move forward from there. Another rumor is that the movie will have a female villain, but not only is that just a rumor, but also nothing suggests that female villain will be the main villain. I say this because, and this might sound bad, I don't think Spider-Man, with as big of a rogues gallery as he has, like the second best ever, I don't think he has a single female villain with main villain potential. One exception is maybe Shothra, a sort of anti-Spider Totem multiversal threat that could work if this movie is a big multiversal team-up or a live-action Spider-Verse movie, but man, I really do not want to see that. I don't like the Spider Totem lore, I don't like Shothra, and I don't want this to be a Spider-Verse movie at all. The female villain in question could be referring to the Black Cat, and I really hope it is, but in that case, she's barely really a villain. I definitely love for Black Cat to appear, but as a love interest who is villainous, but not truly a villain. If she is truly a villain, then certainly not the main villain. One final female villain option is a character named Lily Hollister, aka Menace, who has precedence for being used here because of the movie's title. In the comics, Brand New Day was the first storyline in a new era of Spider-Man that came after the aftermath of the incredibly unpopular One More Day, in which Peter gave up his marriage to MJ in exchange for Aunt May's life and getting his secret identity back. That story inspired No Way Home, and now the following story is being used as the title for the sequel. Lily Hollister was one of the newly introduced characters in this new era, introduced as Harry Osborn's girlfriend and the best friend of Carly Cooper, Peter's new love interest. Later, she became Menace, a Green Goblin-like villain with all the same Green Goblin powers and also a glider. It's very possible that the same thing will be done here. It's been at least 3 years in universe since the events of No Way Home, so Peter has since likely already started college and could easily have already befriended Harry Osborn. Lily could be introduced as Harry's girlfriend, who then becomes Menace. She's certainly the most likely female Spider-Man villain to be used here, aside from Black Cat, who again is barely a villain. The main villain, however, of Brand New Day was Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative, and for all intents and purposes, he could work really well. As a superpowered mob boss, he's grounded in his stakes, but powerful enough to threaten Spider-Man in a one-on-one fight. He has unique powers that can create interesting visuals for the movie, and his negative side could reflect Peter's conflicting identities, whether that be Peter prioritizing Spider-Man like the script from the end of No Way Home promised, or maybe his loneliness making him more violent, or even him succumbing to the similarly colored symbiote. Whatever it is, Mr. Negative fits basically everything. Then again, Mr. Negative, for as new of a villain as he is, was already used as one of the main villains in a big project, Spider-Man PS4. Now sure, that was 8 years before this movie will come out, and he wasn't actually the main villain, that was Dr. Octopus, but he also reappeared in the sequel in 2023, and I'm struggling to think about what they could do with him here, especially visually, they didn't already do in the game. I wouldn't be disappointed if he's announced, and honestly he's still one of my top choices, but there's maybe others that I'd prefer. The immediate following story after Brand New Day, Big Time, used a few Spider-Man villains who could be considered just because the story is so close, like the Spider Slayer, who has never been used in anything, but honestly, for good reason, he's kind of lame, or the Hobgoblin, who I'd like for them to get around to eventually, but him being used as the main villain here would make for 2 goblins in a row, and even as a side villain, there are so many others I'd prefer. Then there's the Scorpion, the real reason I brought up this story, who appeared there and is also a part of another group of villains, of which there are 4, who already exist in the MCU and are already cast and are just waiting to be given a larger role. Mac Gargan was played by Michael Mando all the way back in Spider-Man Homecoming, 9 years before Brand New Day comes out, and was teased to be returning in the after-credit scene. Nearly a decade later, it's high time he returns. In a lot of ways, Scorpion is a pretty perfect villain. He's grounded, he's a violent psychopath with little to no sympathetic qualities, which would set him apart from the previous villains and would fit well with the darker path that Peter is on, maybe being a brutal enough psycho to push Peter, maybe even currently being overtaken by the symbiote to go too far. That said, I don't think Scorpion fits fully. For one, he was recently used as one of the main villains in Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. He's also usually more of a secondary main villain, more like the muscle working for the bigger villain. Somebody else makes his suit, he's not smart enough to do that. I do think anything could work. Scorpion is a really cool villain who I'd love to see maybe retooled a bit into having main villain potential, but without that, it would make a lot more sense for him to be working for the main villain. Either way, Scorpion absolutely should appear in Brand New Day. Similarly, but to a lesser extent, is Aaron Davis, aka the Prowler, who also is already cast with Donald Glover playing him and would connect to Homecoming, closing or continuing that open thread. But Prowler isn't really a Peter Parker main villain, he's a Miles Morales main villain, something that we definitely could see in the future, but until then, I think he should have the exact same role as the Scorpion, simply working for the main villain, but with a fraction of the Scorpion's villainous intent. Dmitry Smirdyakov, the Chameleon in the comics, appeared in Far From Home and was played by Newman Akar. This is the weird one since he's a little bit close to being eliminated by factors that eliminated others. The Chameleon actually appeared in Kraven the Hunter, and I eliminated all of the rest of the Sony villains. The reason the Chameleon is an exception is, well, for one, he already existed in the MCU, so he's already there, but secondly, he appeared only briefly, as far as I could tell only one scene, in a movie that nobody, including myself, saw, and I don't think really anybody talks about it either, so I think the Chameleon could be left unscathed. Like Scorpion, Chameleon was recently used in Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, but to a much lesser extent. There's also no overlap with the games, because he barely appeared in Spider-Man 2, and while he was set up for 3, that's probably years away. Dmitry had no lines in Far From Home as far as I can remember, and works for Nick Fury, so to be honest, I have no clue how well this actor would work, and they'd have to definitely pivot his character completely, but he's already around. He'd have to be implemented at some point, otherwise that's a loose thread that's never closed. Chameleon also just works really well. He's grounded and would be very different from the previous Tom Holland Spidey villains, being more of a subtle behind-the-scenes villain. He'd also fit really well in a potential identity crisis that Peter is maybe going through. Peter no longer really exists. Chameleon can then threaten to take away the one thing that Spider-Man has left, which is Spider-Man, by framing him and ruining his image. Peter would then rediscover his identity and prove everyone wrong as both Peter and Spider-Man. Or maybe it'll go even worse. Maybe he'll he'll then succumb to the symbiote or something. It could go a lot of ways, but I think that Chameleon could definitely fit. Chameleon isn't a physical threat, so Scorpion and Prowler could then work with him, or maybe all three could work for the true mastermind, whoever that might be. But either way, I think Chameleon could definitely fit better than most other villains. The absolute perfect main villain with just one potential caveat is the Kingpin. Wilson Fisk ticks all the right boxes. It's as street level as you can get. Spider-Man and Kingpin have been in the MCU for a decade now, and while Fisk is Daredevil's archenemy, he debuted as a Spider-Man villain and is still very much a part of the Spider-Man Rogues Gallery, so they should definitely face off against each other. It would be a great opportunity for a Spider-Man Daredevil crossover, and with all of his resources, Kingpin could definitely be used as the perfect opportunity to close every open thread from the home trilogy. He could hire Prowler to help with Daredevil, Scorpion as his anti-Spider-Man weapon, Chameleon to frame mass vigilantes to reinforce his campaign, all while we can ensure a great casting and a great performance with the perfectly cast Vincent D'Onofrio. On top of that, the Green Goblin also proved that you could take another hero's villain and give him a great rivalry with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, and people definitely accepted it. However, I think there's something wrong here, and I think it's a little bit unrealistic to expect the Kingpin for various reasons. There's a big difference between Willem Dafoe's Norman Osborn and Vincent D'Onofrio's The Kingpin. For Norman Osborn, he comes from one movie, it's a Spider-Man movie, and it's a very popular one, so there's not really a lot of homework. Basically, everyone who went to watch No Way Home already watched the first Spider-Man movie, and if they didn't, all they have to do is watch one movie. For Kingpin, it's very, very different. There's like 3 seasons of a non-Spider-Man show you have to watch. People who have already seen it, that's fine, but the general audience probably hasn't, especially all of the children who go and can't watch Daredevil because it's an adult show, or Daredevil Born Again for that matter. With Kingpin, I think there's a bit of a danger that something could go wrong here, and one of a few things could happen. One, they use the plot of Daredevil and therefore the movie requires homework, something audiences are getting more and more tired of, and as it's a PG-13 movie and a rated R show, not everybody who watches the movie could go watch the show. Option number 2, they ignored Daredevil and effectively set Kingpin up from the ground up, maybe with hints here and there, in which case it'd feel a bit off for Daredevil viewers. I think his appearance in Hawkeye proved exactly that. It felt like a different character. The third option would be the best case scenario. They somehow managed to pull off both Kingpin feeling like the exact same character for the show, or rather a PG-13 version, while also having one complete story in this movie, not requiring any homework. If they could pull it off, then absolutely Kingpin would be my top choice. He would be the ideal main villain for Brand New Day, with Prowler, Scorpion, and maybe the Chameleon all working for him, and Black Cat as the female villain in question. Obviously, for me personally, if they just continue the Daredevil storyline and they make the movie R-rated, then honestly I would have no issue with that, but they can't do that. My point is, Kingpin would be the ideal villain, but it sounds like it'd be almost impossible for them to pull it off, and if he comes off like he did in Hawkeye or Echo, I'd honestly rather they just didn't. And honestly, it might not even be possible. Daredevil Born Again recently started filming season 2, and Brand New Day will likely start filming soon. It might not even be possible for this to even happen. So if Kingpin isn't an option, then I think my top choice would actually be the Chameleon, with all those villains working alongside him rather than for him. Then again, I'm more and more warming up to the idea of them using Mr. Negative again because of how well it fit and how he could just as easily employ Prowler, Scorpion, and the Chameleon. Basically, I want a street level story using a main villain with the resources to employ or work with all of the villains who were set up by the home trilogy, with Black Cat being used as a love interest rather than a villain, but maybe a little bit villainous, and is the villain in question when talking about the female villain rumored for this movie, if that is to be true. And no connections to the Sony movies, no connections to the multiverse, and I think the best options for that are Kingpin, which would be my top choice if it were realistic, Mr. Negative, and Chameleon, both of whom I think are my top choices if Kingpin isn't realistic, but I don't necessarily know which one I would choose first. Let me know in the comments down below who you think should be the main villain of Spider-Man Brand New Day, and thanks so much for watching.